Renaissance art was an expensive investment, with only the wealthiest members of society acting as patrons. As it was so expensive, the patrons required that the artwork be useful or somehow beneficial to them, so most Renaissance art was made with a specific purpose and audience in mind. However, over time, some of these intentions have been forgotten, the art's narrative and mystery. However, by looking at narrative genres and patterns of the Renaissance, we can hypothesize what these pieces of art were made for and what they could have meant. First, a narrative is any visual that can convey a message or story. These narratives can rely on color to evoke an emotion, the environment to note a specific setting or story, figures and their positioning to show an emotion or movement, and most Renaissance art relies heavily on symbolism to convey specific messages. Techniques for storytelling changed drastically through the Renaissance, with more emphasis being put on realism and drama as time went on. Some images were displayed publicly, like a lot of religious imagery, and some were displayed more privately with personal narratives imbued within them. However, almost all Renaissance art had contemporary figures placed within them and were symbols of power, piety, and sometimes education. The early Renaissance was composed mostly of religious artwork. These narratives were separated into two broad categories: images and stories. Images were representations of a person, like a saint, and were often used as a focus for devotion, prayer, and worship. Stories were meant to be educational and moralizing, displaying biblical events like the crucifixion of Jesus. Stories have been broken down further in up to 8 different interlapping categories. These are the main 4: episodic, narratives, pictorial déjà vu, monoscenic, and mystic realism. Episodic narratives were a single image, or a piece like an altar, made up of several smaller images and intended to provoke pious sensations. Mystical realism emphasized the divine and otherworldliness of sacred subjects or figures over naturalism. Pictorial déjà vu and monoscenic narratives are also common types that we will discuss further. Pictorial déjà vu, or the continuous narrative, may seem to be the strangest or most confusing narrative technique to modern viewers. However, it was comprehensible in the 15th century. This form began in the medieval era and relied on the repetition of characters. As we can see in the Adoration of the Magi by Gentile da Fabiano, the 3 kings appear in 3 different locations: once in the top left looking at the star, a second in the center top traveling to the birth of Jesus, and a third at the bottom worshiping at his feet. They were not depicted as being in all 3 places at once, but it was intended to denote movement and the passage of time, telling the whole story in one image. The elaborate use of detail and gold leafing was used to show the patron's power, wealth, and piety. The patron and a few other contemporary figures are included among the crowd behind the Magi. The continuous narrative was often also episodic and could be more of a mystic realism than a natural kind of art. Monoscenic narratives were quite different from pictorial déjà vus. They utilized a unified pictorial format instead of an episodic one, combining all the symbols and imagery they needed into one single picture. They also used linear and aerial perspective in chronological order. Replacing repetition, allusions to other parts of the story were added. In Botticelli's Adoration of the Magi, 4 different allusions can be seen. The star above Mary's head is an allusion to the Magi's travels to the manger. Joseph's sad expression symbolizes Christ's eventual crucifixion. The peacock on the top right is a symbol to Christ's resurrection and eternal life in heaven. The ruins on the left in the background symbolize Christianity's eventual domination and overcoming of pagan religion. As most genres in this time period, contemporary figures were added for additional messages. In this case, several members of the Medici family is shown in the image, one even kissing the foot of Jesus. This would display them as a powerful and pious family. There are also other important figures like a philosopher and a humanist in the left crowd. The High Renaissance moved away from the traditional form of Christian art seen in the early Renaissance. Pagan stories and symbolism increased in popularity among the upper class, and therefore their presence increased in art. Christian values and allusions were later attached to them as an afterthought, with new connections needing to be made to justify the presence of pagan art in general. Classical theme art was, however, not considered sacrilegious, but a symbol of education, and they also were used as behavioral models or expressions of a family or group's special virtues. Early archaeological excursions not only influenced art's subject matter, but its content. Studies of text and ancient work changed the way figures were presented and created the desire to preserve and celebrate history in patrons. Unlike a lot of religious paintings, most mythological pieces were displayed privately and displayed classical ideals as well as personal narratives and symbols. This genre of history paintings can be divided into 4 different categories. Religious history recounts Christian stories, like the betrayal of Christ by Giotto. Mythological history displays Greco-Roman legends, fables, and myths, like La Primavera by Botticelli. Allegorical history tells stories with hidden meanings, like The Garden of Earthly Delights by Bosch. Historical history paintings memorializes events and figures in history, like the School of Athens does with philosophers and artists of the time. Mythological paintings had high-minded or heroic messages. They usually recounted pagan myths with bright colors and dramatic movement, but also had Christian values hidden within them. For example, in Titian's painting of Bacchus and Ariadne, the animalistic side effects of drunkenness can be shown on the right, darker side of the painting, with individuals waving around dismembered parts of a steer, and there's a slothful, obese god on a donkey in the far back. However, on the brighter left side of the painting, the good side effects of a faithful marriage can be seen. Since these paintings were intended for a select, private audience, it is no surprise that they also contain personal symbolism. This painting is meant to represent Alfonso and Lucrezia Borgia's marriage. The dog on the lower left-hand side is a symbol of marital fidelity or loyalty, and the 2 cheetahs pulling Bacchus's chariot are a symbol of their erotic encounter. Narratives were essential to Renaissance culture and individual life. They explain and express religious beliefs of individuals and churches, displayed their patrons' power, piety, and education, and provided some insight to modern viewers of what their personal lives may have been like through obscure symbolism. The Renaissance narrative is also important to modern artists. It shows that there are a variety of techniques an artist can use to tell a story. We can use icons, or we could use symbols that only a select small group of people could understand, so that it would be mysterious to a more general audience. For more information on Renaissance narratives and the types of genres that they have separated them into, I suggest visiting the Italian Renaissance Learning Resource by the National Gallery of Art. And if you have any questions, you can always ask me in class.